I am completing every From Software game they have ever made. I am beating them in order of release. This is Kingsfield 2. So Kingsfield 2 is the second game from FromSoftware. It's the first game that we actually got in the States. We never got Kingsfield 1, which is the game I talked about last week. Now, Kingsfield 2 is absolutely my favorite game of the Kingsfield series. And if you weren't here for the first talk through of Kingsfield 1, I'll tell you a little bit about Kingsfield. Kingsfield is essentially a first-person dungeon crawler, no hand-holding game, essentially where you have to figure your way out through the entire game kind of yourself, you know what I mean? What's interesting is in the first game, in Kingsfield 1, you have 5 different floors that you go to, basically standing on these pentagrams that then load the floor for you to go to. In Kingsfield 2, all of the loading is done on the very front end of the video game. Right when you hit the start button, you see this guy come up with a moonlight sword, where if you don't know what that is, you don't even know that they're showing you the last sword in the game at the beginning of the game. So guys hitting this moonlight sword showing you a loading screen. When the game loads, that is the only loading of the entire game. There is no more loading. You will not see another loading screen ever again throughout the entire game. You can beat that game from start to finish without ever seeing a loading screen. And I think that that's very impressive of the time, and probably what pulled me in so much into the Kingsfield genre or like series as a whole. Is I really like that immersion where they're trying their absolute best to keep you out of menus and everything already. And Kingsfield 2 does a bunch of advancements that Kingsfield 1 didn't even think about. In Kingsfield 1, I forgot to talk about certain things. As we're talking about these talk-throughs, they're going to get longer because I'm going to be talking about the previous game usually, because it has some kind of relation to it, right? So in Kingsfield 1, you had these things called phantom rods, right? You could use a phantom rod on any floor, and it would teleport you to the starting teleporter of that floor. And if you walk back on the starting teleporter, then you go back down to the last floor of the end teleporter. You see what I'm saying? So essentially, like if you knew how to get around the map, you could use a phantom rod, not a phantom rod. It was like a wand that you could get, not the phantom rod. Phantom rods to find like secret walls, but you could use this wand, and this wand would teleport you back, right? In Kingsfield 2, they go a step above that. So what you do is when you go to most save places in the game, there's not many, but of the few save places that there are in the game for you to actually save on your memory card, there's usually a shrine or a stand there. And that stand is for you to put in this star and or this key. Essentially, you place in these keys once you find them on the map. See, the game is very much the same as Kingsfield 1. It's all about progression of the map and like progression of yourself as a character, because you all are doing it naturally. So what they did with the advancement in Kingsfield 2 is with these keys, when you have this gate that you find, which is like you have a moon key and a moon gate, a star key and a star gate, a sun key and a sun gate. When you find the gate and you've placed the key in one of those places anywhere around the map, you can then teleport by just using the key in your item screen, and it will teleport you to the save. So that then gives room and like a feeling of you can go explore probably further than you should be without feeling like the world's coming down if you go too far and then you don't have any way out. You know what I'm saying? And I really think that you can tell that they were really pushing the envelope forward on what they were thinking as what they should do with their game. Perfect example. Again, this is just more talking about the game in general. And, you know, if you haven't played it, I totally think you should play it. At the end, I'll show you the final boss. We'll talk about all that kind of stuff. But remember, these are just talk throughs of me just experiencing these games, right? So Kingsfield 2, when you start, you have an option. You can go right or you can go left. If you go left, there's a giant tentacle crab monster right there for you. You go. One, I need to beat this big ass monster right there. He'll fuck you up. Fuck that. immediately letting you know, hey, this is not gonna be some walk in the park game. You know what I mean? And what's interesting is you're not supposed to fight him initially. You know, speedrunners do. Speedrunners fight him within like the first 4 minutes of the game or something crazy like that. But you're not supposed to fight him initially. You're supposed to wait until you get strong enough and you've explored the right side of the island as much as you can for as far as you can go in this area. And then you're supposed to come back and then explore that once you're strong enough to actually be able to fight this giant tentacle monster. And he's still strong as hell. It's a queen actually, and she can knock you off into the water. It's a real boss battle almost, you know? It's a real objective that must be completed. Well, not must, but kind of has to be completed in order for you to progress through and do other things that you need to do. And what's interesting is the game is so deep and rich with so many different biomes. You have an outside area, you have a courtside area, you have an actual king's field, like you have Harvine's castle. You have all these different biomes. You got like a sand biome and then an ice biome, and then you have like the mines, and then you ride on mine carts. There's so much depth to be had in this little adventure that I think it's just such a fun and interesting game. And I think that the combat in itself also holds weight. See, the interesting about Kingsfield 1 and 2 is there's no analog stick yet made. The analog stick doesn't come out for another year, I think, or something like that, for PlayStation. So right now it's 1995. Maybe the analog stick came out in 95, but there's essentially no real games using the analog stick. So how you use your controls in Kingsfield 2 is the same as Kingsfield 1, but a little bit more refined because there's a new mechanic that's been brought to Kingsfield 2. In Kingsfield 1, there was no sprint. You just walk the same speed you always walk. In Kingsfield 2, there actually is a sprint mechanic and a stamina gauge essentially tied to it, where if your stamina is at full and you swing, then that's a full swing. But let's say you drained your stamina off that swing and it's coming back and you swing where it's halfway, that then means that the damage that you've done is going to be smaller than if you let it get to max. And you can't use your magic until that meter goes to max. If you run, when you're running, it goes like this, but you can run the whole time, but you can't attack until, you don't want to attack until that stamina bar goes back to max. So there's a lot of interesting give and go in the combat in the second game. And what I also think is very interesting about these Kingsfield games that almost no other game was doing is you can touch the enemies. FromSoftware has almost never wavered on this. You've always been able to touch the enemy without them hurting you, as long as they're not attacking. And I think that that's an interesting concept to think of, because in 1994 we were playing games like Donkey Kong Country, right? And when you play Donkey Kong Country, it's just you run into the enemy and it hurts you. That's just how we naturally figured games were back then. Whereas FromSoftware, even back then, was deciding how they really wanted to make the foundation of their games. And what's also interesting is, I know people say that this is the Souls-like game. I'm here to tell you, I'm gonna show you the first Souls-like game when we get to it. I'll show you the true first Souls-like game. In my opinion, this isn't a Souls-like game, but there are many beats and notes that are implemented in Souls games later on, like the stamina gauge. Honestly, the stamina gauge being implemented here is almost exactly how you implement it in Souls games, except you can build the meter bigger. In Kingsfield, you can't build the meter bigger. You know what I mean? There's also Estus flask, and you can refill the flask in this game as well. So you can go to a fountain and you can refill it with water, and you can, by the end of the game, you can have 20 flasks, and you could be refilling each flask with this gold piss water, essentially, from dragons. That's not piss water, but I call it gold piss water from dragons. And like actually consuming it, and it gives you like full health and like half mana or whatever it does. There's also a lot of like mystery, but all the answers are somewhat in the game. There's interesting items that are specifically for lore items, like descriptions of items. There's a thing called a truth mirror, and you can get a couple of them throughout the game. And one of the truth mirrors you can usually keep. So you keep this truth mirror and you can press it on any enemy, any item, almost anything in the game. You can press the truth mirror on any area, and it'll give you a description of the area. It'll give you a description of the enemy, of the item or whatever, with like some lore tied to it, you know what I mean? So you can already see the beats and the notes of From Software's like implementation as to what they would do with like Demon Souls, you know what I'm saying, when Demon Souls comes out, and like majority of the lore is in the item descriptions and everything else, not just like given to you as, oh, you hit this beat, you cutscene here, cutscene there. You know, there's no cutscenes. There's a couple cutscenes, but there's not many cutscenes in Kingsfield 2. You know what I mean? Another really interesting mechanic is they've also amped up the leveling up system. Remember in the first game, I was telling you, you level up kind of like Skyrim, right? What you do, what you put into it, what you get. But in this game, you can actually learn magic based off what you're doing. So if I'm using a lot of fire attacks, then I learn more fire attacks. If I'm using a lot of wind attacks, I learn more wind attacks on the fly. Once he learns the magic, once you've learned the magic and the ability to do it, you essentially can just learn magic attacks on the fly. And when you swing on enemies, it also gets stronger on the fly. So the game has this very natural progression where they're trying they're trying their best to get you out of the pause menus, again, as much as humanly possible, which is irony because later on you can't even pause their games, you know? So again, these little intricacies that I noticed throughout all other games as I'm progressing through is kind of why I wanted to do this talk through instead of an actual review, because if I do an actual review, it's going to force me to kind of stay in one game, whereas in this I can kind of like wave between them all and give you guys like a big overall like note of my whole experience as I'm progressing through these games. So you know, that's pretty much Kingsfield in a nutshell. The music is also amazing. A lot of the enemies are amazing. The magics feel good. Impact feels good. It's one of my absolute favorite games of all time. I've beaten it maybe 6 times now or something like that. Highly, highly, highly recommend. And let's just do a little talk about the last little bit of area, you know. So this part of the game is very interesting because it's a maze that's like in this weird little time maze, but it's a very simple maze once you know where to go. But the enemies are like, well, weird metallic. I'm not even sure what this represents. You know, does it mean that the dragons have warped reality so much that they've built their own pocket dimension where they can exist outside of time and everything, and the enemies that are stuck inside of there have become so hardened from being in that like area that maybe it's like a pressure vacuum that like makes the enemy stronger? I'm not even sure what it means, bro, but it's such an interesting area. And then the final boss is Goyra essentially hiding the Moonlight Sword behind his back. Like you don't get the Moonlight Sword until the very, very, very end of this game, but you can actually walk over and grab the Moonlight Sword. I didn't do it this time, but I've done it before. I've walked over and grabbed the Moonlight Sword, and then we just mob through the Moonlight with the Moonlight Sword through the game, because the Moonlight Sword has its own attacks, it's got its own special abilities and everything, but you can't get it till the end of the credits roll when you grab the Moonlight Sword, essentially. Like that's kind of the goal of this game, is to defeat Goyra and grab the Moonlight Sword. Oh, something else I didn't talk about real quick. The NPCs in this game are very creepy and mysterious, and they also all are like stuck in this world that Necron's created. Necron is this guy who's taken advantage of this island called Melanat, and essentially what he's done is he's using everybody to mine these things that are like I can't remember the name of them. Not Rock of Life, that's in Kingsfield 4. They're mining these like gems and shit or whatever, right? And he's using everybody in the island to like mine these areas. And it's crazy because when you go outside in the normal area, right, it's like black, right? But there's one part in the village that you can go into and the skies are blue, and Necron's the one that does that. You fight Necron like towards the end of the game or whatever, but Necron's the one that actually makes that area light for these villagers to like keep them sane and shit, so they don't go crazy and like, you know, trip out and shit. It's a very interesting game, and the lore is rich and it's there. This is also another game where it's fully 3D rendered. There's really no 2D objects. Everything in the game has a close-up shot of it that zooms around slowly for you, so you can be able to look at it. Take your time with these games and enjoy what they're giving you. There's also really interesting things with these things called dragon trees. If you sit and wait at a dragon tree long enough, a dragon fruit will drop down. Dude, the game is just rich. When I tell you it is rich, it is rich. The only gripe about the game is like the game runs at like 17 FPS, 17.5. Kingsfield 1 runs better than Kingsfield 2 does, 100%. Kingsfield 2 runs at like 17.5 FPS. And honestly, I've tried putting it 60 on an emulation and it does not work. It makes the game feel terrible. I have to play that game at like 17.5 FPS. It's so strange, man. I would like to see like a remaster done at 30, which is possible. Somebody's doing a remake right now, a Kingsfield 2 remake, and it's been pretty good. Like, I got to the end of that demo. That was really fun as well. But yeah, man, that's gonna be it for me on this one, pretty much, bro. I absolutely love Kingsfield 2. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It was such an adventure to play it for the first time in like 2018, I think is the first time I played it. But playing it in order after playing Kingsfield 1 was a true fucking world opener of an experience, to see the differences in development almost instantaneously, to see what they were able to accomplish. The different amount of geometry alone is mind-boggling. The different things that they have you do with like quote-unquote set pieces is mind-boggling compared to Kingsfield 1. You don't really change Kingsfield 1 environment. You turn a switch, some arrows stop shooting or something. You don't kill an ice giant and then the whole world that was ice like disappears and you reveals like rocks. You know what I'm saying? There's so many cool moments in Kingsfield 2, and I think that's why it's a lot of people's favorite one. Is it has so many awesome moments. It's easy to get lost in it, and you know, it's not necessarily you're not going to be able to just instantly remember your way around, but once you set up, I tell people all the time, set up landmarks. Think of landmarks. If you set up landmarks, you'll be fine. You'll have a good time. Also, if you're like a person like me, bro, I have a terrible sense of direction, and sometimes I don't know if I've collected everything, and I'll loop back something 5-6 times before I've actually left something. It's a terrible habit. I have a terrible game sense when it comes to sense of direction. So what I usually do is, there's like a light guide on GameFAQs. This guy has a light guide where he'll tell you an area and he'll tell you like items in that area. So what I'll do is I'll fully explore an area till I feel like I'm fully done, and then I'll look at his light guide just to see the name of the items and be like, okay, check, and like almost like a checklist, and be like, okay. And then if it's something I don't know what it is, then I'm like, okay, maybe I can't get that yet or whatever else. Like that way I kind of keep myself in check, you know what I'm saying, to what we can achieve. Now I don't need a guide, but I did when I did this in 2021. I definitely needed a guide for sure. We've beaten it again since then, for their anniversary, but you know, I definitely needed a guide back then. But either way, it was still an adventure. It was a hell of a time. And like I said, I didn't use like a, you know, word for word go here guide, but I definitely used a guide for sure. So either way, I appreciate you guys for kicking it on the Kingsfield 2 chat. Next up is Kingsfield 3. We'll be talking about that game. That game is better in some ways and worse in some ways. And it's one of the first Kingsfield games where I'm not the biggest fan. In fact, my order for the trilogy is 2-1-3. For the Verdite trilogy is 2-1-3. Kingsfield 3 to me has its issues. It's an awesome game, but we'll talk about that next time. I'll see y'all on the next one. Peace. Fucking sword to destroy each other. That makes perfect sense. I was using the ability Seath thinking that was gonna kill him, but it makes sense that it doesn't, because why would it? They had to make swords to destroy each other. I kind of like that.
Since this time, a holy light broke through the darkness, and the warm sunshine of dawn filled the island. Alexander looked to the heavens and began to feel his spirit glow inside him. He began walking again. Now that he possessed the Moonlight Sword, he had nothing to fear. With this sword, he was more powerful than the gods or the demons, for all knew that he was the chosen man with the chosen sword. Ghosts, monsters, and demons disappeared from Marinette. The two dragons, Seath and Gyra, also vanished from the island. By the will of the people, the two swords were taken to Verdighty and sealed forever. This ensured that the people on the island and on the northern continent would live in peace and quiet ever after.
It's crazy that it says that Seath and Gyra fucking disappeared from the island. It's like they went to go create Dark Souls. Kind of crazy to think about. That's it, man. He actually died so fast there's no even need to talk about a cheesy way to beat him. It's so funny. You don't even really get to use the Moonlight Sword in this game. You can technically if you jump on his back. But you used the Moonlight Sword in the first game. Oh, I don't know why. Come on, don't start skipping on me now. Whatever's going on in my background. There it is. How to describe Kingsfield, man? It's like very rough to look at on an outside perspective, but the more I play it, the more I realize like the amount of love and dedication that was put into this game in 1995, I would say almost didn't exist. There was no one doing this in 95. Nobody. You know, there was innovations that were happening all on all types of fronts, you know, but when it comes to like making a truly 3D immersed world that never really you feel like you're ever taken out of, and then not only on top of that, never really makes you feel like you have to do too much work to level up to any specific means. Like when you're playing it naturally, and it's a lot of it's just natural. Oh, I got stronger because I'm doing this as it's naturally occurring. You're just finding more abilities and more weapons that are increasing your range of what you can do. But entirely, the game in itself really just complements whatever playstyle you want, you know? Thanks for that follow, yo. That was great. 95, man. We should look at the games that came out in 1995. I'm just curious, like, what even was the competition that year? Kingsfield 2. Down and done, baby.